Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the preview of the SEC with college football starting officially on Saturday. I cannot wait for football every single weekend through the Super Bowl starting officially this weekend. I am very, very excited for it. We also talked about some quarterback dilemmas in the NFL, including what the Giants should do about Daniel Jones, what the media has been overreacting about him, and of course, the Tua situation with his former head coach, Brian Flores. In an interview with Dan Le Batard's show on Monday, he came out and talked about how he felt like he was being mistreated by the coaching staff and how the new coaching staff has really helped him succeed in the NFL. Talked about all of that, but in this segment, we're continuing our coverage of every single NFL team as we count down the days until the NFL season officially kicks off. That's right, just 9 days away, I believe, or excuse me, a little bit longer than that, but we are almost to the NFL season. Thursday night football kickoff between the Chiefs and the Ravens, but today, we take a look at the Raiders, finishing off the AFC West. We're going to do a whole division recap as well, but in this segment, we're starting with their off-season. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net, or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. It should be right next to the chat box. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I appreciate anything you do have to say. I appreciate everybody for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to continue our coverage of every single NFL team today, talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders had quite the interesting season last year. They had Josh McDaniels as their head coach, let him go mid-season, bring in as interim head coach former Giants linebacker Antonio Pierce. He united that team under rookie quarterback Aiden O'Connell. They went 5-4 in his tenure. A solid start for that team. It was a much easier schedule than it was this year, and we'll do the schedule stuff a little bit in our fifth and final segment here today. But Antonio Pierce gets brought on as the official full-time head coach, after a successful interim run. It's not something we usually see. It's very rare in the NFL nowadays for the interim coach to be hired as the coach afterwards. And we thought that would happen with Rich Bisaccia with the Raiders last time. They didn't make the same mistake again. They listened to the players, listened to the fans. Antonio Pierce is the official head coach now. A lot of that had to do with star pass rusher and potential defensive player of the year, Max Crosby, saying he'd request a trade if they didn't hire Antonio Pierce. So that's a really good sign off the bat. Before we get into any kind of analysis about what they did this offseason, that is a great, great sign that the players want that coach to be there. That is only going to build camaraderie, and having a happy locker room is a huge component to being successful in any kind of sports league. But the Raiders still have a lot of work to do. They weren't the greatest team last year. They had a lot of issues, and they weren't all solved. They let Josh Jacobs walk, instead passing the rock over to Zamir White, who was a rookie last season, who in 4 games starting rushed for almost 400 yards. It's not a great offensive line, and they did have a quarterback controversy in camp. It got answered over the weekend. The choice between veteran, I guess at this point, journeyman quarterback Gardner Minshew, only 28 years old, and former and rookie from last season who started a bunch of games, Aiden O'Connell. And for what it's worth, those two guys are very similar. We did a whole segment comparing those two in, I believe, yesterday's show. But this is probably the right choice, I believe. The other big move of the offseason for the Las Vegas Raiders was acquiring star defensive tackle Christian Wilkins from free agency. They end up bringing him in on the second biggest contract that was given out in the entirety of NFL free agency, over $110 million for him. That is going to be a nasty defensive line. Pairing him up with Max Crosby, we already talked about how good Max Crosby could be, a potential defensive player of the year. You take a look at that defense now. Again, the center pieces, Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins. You have a couple of other solid pieces, including Jack Jones, Marcus Epps, and Nate Hobbs in the secondary. But the rest of it isn't great. This is going to be a deadly pass rush, but the passing defense isn't going to be too much to look at. This is a team with a lot of holes. I do really like what they did in the draft, though. They were able to, first of all, get great value, getting tight end Brock Bowers. I know they drafted a tight end in Michael Mayer last season in the second round, but Brock Bowers is a guy that can play that Travis Kelce role, that wide receiver that is a tight end role, that extremely versatile role that everyone is looking for nowadays. Brock Bowers is that guy. He looks to slot in there. Their second round pick also was one of my favorite interior linemen in Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. They have him listed as a backup. I would be surprised if he doesn't start, if not at center, then at a guard position. He is one of the most complete linemen in the draft, and he is going to be a huge part of any kind of running game that they want to have. They also brought in Alexander Madison, who was a longtime backup in Minnesota, became a starter. Wasn't really his role, but he has always been a very solid backup to back up Zamir White in his second season. This is a team that has, yes, a lot of holes. This is a team that needs a lot of help, but they still have Devontae Adams, right? They still have a quarterback that I trust in Gardner Minshew, a guy who has been getting a lot of Ryan Fitzpatrick comparisons, and I think that's a very accurate kind of comparison. He's been a journeyman guy playing with a bunch of teams. He's always been pretty successful wherever he goes, almost leading the Colts he led the Colts to the doorstep of the playoffs last season. The wide receiver core is solid. Again, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. That's a great 1-2 punch. We saw that work. You always have Aiden O'Connell and if Gardner Minshew doesn't work out. You have Brock Bowers at tight end. Wide receiver 3 is a little bit of a mess. Right now, it looks like it's Trey Tucker, who's made a lot of plays in the preseason, connecting on a lot of deep balls from Gardner Minshew so far. But this is an offense that always was more powerful than its defense. The success of this season is going to be how the defense, and more specifically, the pass defense plays. Really, everyone outside of that off defensive line is a question mark for them. We'll have to see what happens, though. I do think that this team can be improved from last season. Right now, the line for their win total currently is set at 6.5. So Vegas doesn't really believe in them. They, again, have a tougher schedule like everybody else in the AFC West. They have to take on the AFC North, a really tough division to take on, as well as, just generally a tougher schedule. Lots of new stuff. I think this is a team that did really solid in the offseason. Again, their draft was one of my favorites. They didn't do too much as far as free agency goes, so I can't give them a super high grade. I would have given them probably a B+ for their draft, getting a lot of value, especially in the first and second rounds. But outside of that, there's not a lot of guys that I expect to be There's not a lot of guys that I expect to be, key contributors really quickly in this league. Now, outside of the draft, which again, I think they killed, the offseason was just meh. So I'm going to bring them down to a B- for their whole offseason. Again, I really did like what they did with a new kind of changing of the guards in Las Vegas. There's a lot of good. They're set up to potentially compete for a wild card spot in the AFC. And if they were in the NFC, I'm being honest, if they were in the NFC, I think they might be a playoff contender. But they're in the AFC. They've got a tough schedule. They've got to play the Chiefs twice. And that's never easy, even though they were able to beat the Chiefs in December, which was shocking. But We will see what happens this season. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we are going to go over their schedule. We're going to see if they can break that 6.5 win margin and see if they can crack their way into a tough AFC playoff. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the Las Vegas Raiders offseason. I gave them a B-. They had a great draft. We're kind of quiet otherwise. In this segment, we're going to go through all 18 weeks, all 17 games for the Las Vegas Raiders, as well as going over what we have for a prediction for the AFC West, in this segment. But before we do all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you have to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today talking some more about the Las Vegas Raiders. All 17 weeks, all 18 weeks, all 17 games for those Raiders. Vegas has their win total set currently at 6.5. We'll see if they go over or under that. The Las Vegas Raiders, like I alluded to in the last segment, do not have a very easy schedule. I'm going to be honest. They have to take on the entirety of the AFC North. That's what the AFC West drew, as well, as taking on the entirety of the NFC South, which could cause some trouble. That's going to be a division that isn't going to be the easiest. But we'll see what the Raiders are able to do this season. Again, they have a later bye week. Week 10 is probably a solid place to have a bye. At about as middle of the season as you can possibly get. There's a couple of week 9 byes, but a week 10 bye is a pretty good draw. We're going to start off their season preview, though. They start off a division game on the road against Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. The opening game for that regime over there, I think that is going to take a win, although this is two head coaches, officially new head coaches for the first time taking on each other. I think the home team in a division matchup like this will end up taking the cake. I am taking the Chargers to win, and the Raiders start off 0-1. Their second game, they get the Ravens on the road in Baltimore. Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson. That is not going to be an easy matchup. The Ravens take care of business. They fall to 0-2 on the season. The Raiders do. In week 3, they get the Panthers. Bryce Young, a struggling offensive line. That is perfect for a new Raider. Christian Wilkins and Max Crosby to take care of what they need to. That is their first home game of the year as well. I think they absolutely dominate the Panthers. Bryce Young has no time to throw the ball, and that front four is going to eat. I think they win, improve to 1-2 on the year. Then they get Browns. This is going to be a pretty equal matchup. I think they both have the same strengths and same weaknesses, but this is at home in Vegas, and I think this might be a battle between two guys that are going to fight for the DPOY reward this year in Max Crosby and Myles Garrett. I'm giving this matchup to Max Crosby and the Raiders, though, as they win in week 4, improve to 2-2 on the year. Then there's another division matchup. They get the Broncos on the road in Mile High. Bo Nix leading the charge here. I think division matchup on the road, I'm giving this one to the Broncos. Week 6 against the Steelers, back at home. Another team that I think is built very similarly to the Raiders, and I think the Raiders have a little more of an idea of what's going on. Again, that quarterback situation with the Steelers is going to drive me and everybody involved with them kind of insane, I think. And I think that's going to be their downfall this season. The Raiders improved to 3-3. Week 7, On the road at the Rams, another tough test. Matthew Stafford has both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Those guys, I think, are just going to shred through that Raiders secondary, and I think that's going to be a little bit too much for the Raiders to handle. The Rams win this game. The Raiders fall to 3-4. Then they get their first matchup against the Chiefs. This one is at home. I know that they beat the Chiefs last season in December, but this is a Chiefs team that is better than they were. They have actual weapons on the outside and receiver that they can use. And Patrick Mahomes isn't going to lose to the Raiders twice in a row. I'm taking the Chiefs to win this game. Raiders fall to 3-5. Week 9 at Joe Burrow and the Bengals. The Ravens, again, the Raiders, I just don't think are that level of team. Again, we talk about the weakness in the secondary. I think Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, that the last hurrah for that receiving core. They're going to do their thing, win this game against the Raiders. The Raiders fall to 3-6 on the year. Then they get a bye week, a much-needed bye, 3-game losing streak heading into the bye. They can regroup, get their bearings straight before they fly down to Miami, a long flight to take on Tua and the Dolphins. And I do think that the Raiders can definitely put up a fight here, but we've talked a lot about the weakness in that secondary. And if there's anyone that can take care of a weak secondary, it's Tyreek Hill. And I think he alone might be too much for the Raiders here. I think the Dolphins are going to take care of business. They win this game. The Raiders fall now to 3-7 on the year. Then they get the Broncos. Another home, this time at home against a division rival. They should take care of business here. I think games against the Broncos, I think, will be competitive. I think the Raiders win this one. They get their 4th win of the year. Next up, against the Kansas City Chiefs, once again, this time in Arrowhead. It's not going to go well. Patrick Mahomes owns this division. He barely ever loses in division, and he barely ever loses at home against division opponents. He barely ever loses, period. But the Chiefs are going to win this game. The Raiders fall once again. Then they get the Bucs on the road against Baker Mayfield. I do think that they are going to be able to pull this game out. This one, I think, is just a really close game either way. Same thing with the next week. That goes against the Falcons. This one is at home. I had this one labeled differently before, but I think with the Falcons' new additions on defense, I think that's going to be just enough to push them over the hump as the Falcons win this game. And the Raiders fall to 5-9 on the year. Then they get the Jaguars. Again, another game that I think could go back and forth, but I think the Trevor Lawrence and I think Brian Thomas is going to be a really solid receiver in this league. He's going to take care of business there. The Jaguars win this game as well, and the Raiders fall to 5-10. At this point, eliminated from playoff contention, they get the Saints on the road. That Saints defense is looking really good this preseason. This is a Saints defense that means business. This is a Saints defense that can put you in there in your place. And this is a Saints defense that you don't want to mess with. I'm taking the Saints to win this game. And then they close out the season against the Chargers. The way it started, again, both of these teams are just playing for pride at this point, but I think Jim Harbaugh is going to have his guys ready, and I think they're going to win this one. The Raiders finish up the season at 5-12 on a 4-game losing streak. I don't know what this means for the future. Again, this is a Raiders team that I think has a lot of promise. This is a Raiders team that has potential to be very good. There's a bunch of games that can go back and forth, and I think I was a little harsh on the Raiders when I was doing this prediction. Anyway, I think 5-12 is about their floor. I think their ceiling, you're looking at a team that's going to go 8-9, somewhere in that range. Now, I don't think they make the playoffs either way. I do think that Antonio Pierce will probably lose his job if he finishes anything less than 7-10. But we'll see what happens. I think Devontae Adams is off of this team by the trade deadline if this is the way the season goes. And I think they're going to go full rebuild mode, let Aiden O'Connell take the reins as well. at least some point through this season. So we will see what happens with the Raiders. We have finished up with the AFC North, with the AFC West, though. So we're going to do a little rundown of what we have in this division. In fourth place, we have these very same Las Vegas Raiders. I do have them going 5-12. I have them losing the tiebreakers to the Chargers here, who also go 5-12. Both of them finish last place in the division. I have the Broncos at 5-12. Both of them finish at last place in the division. In second place, I have the Chargers. They go 6-11. Again, not a great look for anyone else in this division other than the Chiefs. Neither of those three teams are making the playoffs in what is a very stacked AFC, an AFC that I think you have to win 10 games to make the playoffs in minimum. So it's tough to make the playoffs, but that's just how it goes. And of course, the Kansas City Chiefs, I have winning the division. They go 13-4 en route to the number one seed in the AFC. Once again, looking for that three-peat. But anyway, of the Raiders, what record do you have them going? I'd love to see your thoughts. Go and throw that in the comments. In our next show, we are finishing up. We only got one division left. Can you believe that? The NFL season is right around the corner, and we only have one division left. The AFC North. Save the best for last, one of the most competitive divisions in football. So in the next couple of days, throughout the next couple of weeks, we are going to finish up our full predictions as we get ready for the NFL season. Up next, the Cincinnati Bengals tomorrow. But thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Like I said, tomorrow we're taking a look at the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to take a look at the ACC tomorrow, as well as any other major breaking news from around the world of sports. Appreciate you all tuning in. We'll be back here same time, same place on Wednesday, and I will see you then. Have a good one. Bye-bye.